everybody. All right, I don't think anyone's joined yet, so I'm going to be here for a moment watching as people join in. Welcome. Welcome to the third episode of Summer Sippin series with William Chris Vineyards. My name is Kelsey Renee. Thank you for coming back if you've watched the previous two episodes. If you haven't watched the previous two episodes, you still can. There is a link that'll allow you to go to our William Chris Vineyards shop page and purchase the pack that we've been drinking for the last two episodes. That also includes the next two wines we're going to be drinking. Today is the Grenache La Pradera 2019. And then next week, we're going to drink the Tempranillo from Predaire Vineyards, and this is 2017. This we're not drinking today. You have to wait till next week. So just put that off to the side. And as people join, I'm going to put that link in the comments that you can go buy your pack if you haven't already. Or if you loved the wines of the last two episodes and you're going to love the one tonight, go and buy yourself another pack. And then throw in the comments, of course, where you're calling from. If you watched the past two episodes, what your favorite one was. Or if you haven't watched the last two episodes, tell me a little bit about yourself, what you like to drink. Have you had William Chris wines before? How much did you love them? Etc., etc. All right, so in the comments right now, I'm going to post the link that you can go find your Sippin series pack. There you go. All right, hi, Michelle. How are you? Welcome back, Brian. Anne, thanks for joining. Howdy from New Braunfels, absolutely. I am in, Reed, are you in Australia? Because that would be awesome. Tell me yes, I hope so. And then I'm in San Antonio. So yay, San Antonians, come on in. Asia, welcome back. Nice to see you again. All right, so I will be able to chat with you in the comments. I can obviously read everything you're writing to me. So please ask your questions. Tell me how you treated your wine tonight, whether you've had it before, and then throw in any questions you have. I think between the first and the second episodes, I saw that we got a lot more comments last time, which was awesome. But I think what we also saw is I could not address every single question. So now is the time where I'm going to go back and address some of the questions that I had from last week. First, I need to go back and say the aroma wheel that I showed you, I could not think of the woman's name who created it. And her name is Ann Noble. So Ann Noble created the aroma wheel that we looked at last week when we were talking about great personalities. If you didn't catch that episode, go back and watch it. It's on the Facebook Live and the YouTube pages. So Kelly, awesome job on finding the tannin in the Roussanne. That was very, very astute of you. And I think maybe you may have known that Roussanne has a little what we call phenolic bitterness. So Roussanne is what we drank last week. This is a white wine that has a rouge skin. That's how Roussanne got its name, is for its rouge skin. With that color comes a little bit of tannin. And tannin, if you're not familiar, is that dry kind of sandpaper feeling you get with red wine, but sometimes with white wine grapes that have a thicker skin or just a higher tannin content, and often have a little pink tinge to their skin. And this is common in grapes like Grenache Gris, Pinot Gris, Pinot Grigio, and then, of course, Roussanne. So yes, Kelly, I'm so glad you noticed that. That's one of the beautiful things about a grape like Roussanne is you can get a little bit of that tannin, and it's in such a small amount. Again, it's called phenolic bitterness, but it gives you that little ting, that little like smack in the back of your mouth. And with its bright acidity, Roussanne has so much structure. This also makes it super food friendly. And while we're talking about tannin in wine, I want to address Brian's question as well, which I thought I had answered. And then when I went back into the comments, I realized that I think I answered it wrong. Brian had asked for me to tell him about the aging of the Roussanne. And then I went to talk about how long you can age Roussanne and Tempranillo. But Brian, I think what you meant is how was the Roussanne aged on site before it was bottled? So if that was indeed your question, I'm going to tell you a little bit about it. And this ties into, Kelly, what you tasted. So before we pressed the juice of the Roussanne, we let the skin sit with the juice for 2 hours so that it would extract a little color and it would extract a little tannin. So it has an extra little bit of phenolic bitterness. Then it went into 40% large oak fermenters, 10% went into concrete egg, and then 45% went into small barrels. And 10% of those small barrels were new oak. So you have neutral oak that's not imparting any flavor, but just introducing oxygen. And then you have the concrete egg that's not imparting any flavor, but is introducing oxygen. And then 10% of those small barrels were introduced to new French oak. And that's what imparts that little bit of vanilla, cinnamon, nutmeg, and those warm spice flavors. So I hope that answered more of your question, Brian. Let me know if it didn't, or if you need me to expand on anything. And then finally, Kelly, thank you so much for your email. Anyone who has feedback on these or has a specific question is welcome to reach me at kelseykr@williamchriswines.com. Kelly brought up the great point that she had read about Roussanne before in a book called Wine Folly. Wine Folly is a fantastic guide. Madeline Puckett and Justin Hammock wrote this book, giving us a guide to grape varieties around the world, also wine regions, also how to treat our wines. And this is a great tool for finding out how to treat your wines. What Kelly pointed out was that in this book, it says not to decant your Roussannes. And of course, if you watched last week, you know that I did recommend that you decant that Roussanne. So all I can say is that there's so many Roussannes around the world, and I don't expect Justin or Madeline to have tasted William Chris's Roussanne. Maybe the majority of the Roussannes around the world, it's not recommended that you decant. But if you did decant last week's wine, I hope you saw that it was worth it. So with wine, there's always a rule that you break. Most Roussannes don't decant, but the one from last week was so high quality. It had that judge's selection medal for best white wine in Texas. That was the reason that we decanted it. And I challenge you to, of course, assess the wine before you do anything to it. Follow these guides. Wine Folly is amazing for their guides. They put together, materials that haven't existed before, but that is just an initial guide. From there, it's about you assessing the wine like we do every single week and finding out what the best treatment may be and what you need to tweak from the recommendations that you've been given. And I hope that makes sense. I'm so happy y'all are using Wine Folly. I love this book. It has taught me a lot about what I know about wine so far. Because there has been so much interest in tasting wine, I think next week, instead of talking about the future of Texas wine, I'd really like to focus on tasting. And I hope that's okay with everybody. So next episode, we're going to really break down the 2017 Par Tempranillo and just taste it together. Find out what best tricks and tips are used to taste wine. And to make this an extra special Texas tasting episode, not only am I going to taste William Chris's Par Tempranillo, I am also going to taste a second Tempranillo next to it. I have one from Predaire Vineyards. This is the 2018 Reserve Tempranillo from the Texas High Plains. This is a blend of vineyards. This is a single vineyard expression. There's a year difference between the two. And of course, they're two different vineyards with two different winemaking styles. The great thing is we're tasting all 100% Texas grapes. I encourage you to find another Tempranillo to taste alongside the William Chris Tempranillo, whether it be from Texas, from Spain. It often helps to taste two similar grapes next to each other because you'll find different things in each wine that you wouldn't notice without the second glass in front of you. So I hope that you will go onto Pradera's page and find another Tempranillo. Even go onto the William Chris page and find another Tempranillo that we made from a different vineyard. I challenge you to challenge yourself next week when we get really deep into tasting Texas. All right. So let's drink some wine together. As I open this, I'm going to read your comments because I've just been seeing them pop up here, and I want to answer any questions if you've thrown them out for me. But please, please open your 2019 Grenache La Pradera. I'm getting into your comments now. Oh, Asia, congratulations. Asia passed her WSET level 2 with merit. We are drinking to you today. Congratulations. That's absolutely amazing. Hi, Catherine in San Antonio, holding it down. All right, we have people joining from everywhere. Alta, put yours in the freezer for about 10 minutes prior to this, which is awesome. So I refrigerated mine today. I'm doing this Grenache La Pradera kind of backwards. Instead of chilling it down to the temperature I want, I've chilled it down past where I think I'm going to want it. I'm going to let it come up to temperature so that as I smell the wine and it warms up, flavors should come out one by one. And this is a technique, especially if you have trouble identifying aromas in wine and you smell the wine and you get a rush of too many things and you can't pull one apart from the other. As wine warms up, the notes will diffuse at different times. So chill yours down. Again, I smell the top so that I can detect any funkiness that might be on there. If it is a little funky, it may just need to blow off and be decanted. If you get wet dog or cardboard, that is a wine flaw. And that's something that you can go back to the winery and say, hey, I think this is a flawed wine. And you can exchange it for another bottle. But if you're unsure, decant the wine and see if it blows off, because that's often the case. All right, before I do anything to this wine, assess first. This is what we've been doing every week, pouring 1 to 2 ounces and just appreciating the wine together first. Let's look. Oh, look how light that color is. So I've had this wine before. It helps to look at a white background, by the way. I've had this wine before, and it's still so striking how light in color this wine is. Grenache can be very dark in color, especially if it's from Spain or Australia. Even if it's from Texas, it can be very dark in color. This is really vineyard specific. It's year specific. It's how old the grapevines are. It's how old the wine has been, how long the wine has been in bottle. If it's blended with anything else, et cetera, et cetera. Lots of different, I just can't stop looking at this color. So it's a beautiful ruby in the center and then salmon on the outside. It has really started to change in color from center to rim. And then you have kind of a clear water rim on the outside. What this is already telling me is that I can expect some gradation of flavor here. So maybe some fresh fruit and flowers, fresh characters, kind of dipping into some other flavors, because as color changes in wine, the flavor compounds change with it. So you get primary flavors turning into tertiary flavors. If anyone has heard the term legs, let's talk about that real quick. If I have spun this around my glass, I'm just looking at the rim to see how fast the legs are falling. They're falling so fast. Yeah, they're all falling pretty fast. So I expect that this to be maybe low in alcohol, maybe very dry and kind of low in tannin. There's nothing that's really keeping the wine sticking to the sides. I can't wait to smell this. Don't swirl yet. Don't swirl your wine until you've given it a first initial sniff. So initial sniff, what do you think? What do you get? Tell me. I want to see things pop up into the comments. I'm not going to tell you what I'm smelling and tasting. I need you to tell me. If I give you the answers, it's just not as fun. So think, is this red fruited? Is it blue fruited? Is it purple fruits like plum? Is this brambleberries or fresh berries? Is it ripe jam? Or is it really, really tart, mouth-puckering cranberry? Tannin dryness, yes. Jennifer says she has wet dog smell in the wine, but it's because her golden retriever just got out of the pool. That is confusing. Very berry. Yeah, this is super fruit forward. There is a little funk on top of this wine. There's something that's going to blow off. Like it has a little like damp earth or wet leaf or something. It just has funk. So to help blow that off, give it a big swirl. And when I say swirl, I mean get in there, really swirl it. I'm glad I wore a white shirt today, so you're going to get to see me spill wine all over myself. Give it a big swirl. This is funky because it needs to be in contact with oxygen. It's been pretty recently bottled. It's had no oxygen in here, virtually no oxygen. Everything's been sealed in. So you may be getting a bit of reduction. That just means it hasn't been in contact with oxygen, and it needs to be in contact with oxygen and a lot of it. So introduce the oxygen and the wine will transform for you. Oh, now smell it again. Funkiness totally gone. This is a beautiful thing about making wine in an old world style. We crush the grapes, we ferment them, we put them in the bottle. A lot of the times we don't fine or filter. You get a really natural expression of wine this way, which means some funkiness may sit on top, and the reward after swirling is the truth, the soul of the wine. So this maybe has some floral notes to it. It's really, really aromatic and delicate. Minerality, strawberry, tobacco, absolutely. Tobacco, great. So that's a tertiary characteristic. That's a sign that you have fresh primary characters that have already started to transform into that other stuff, that earth, tobacco, wet leaf. It can be leather. It can be, there's so many things. Minerality really shines through after some of the initial flavor compounds have started to transform. Oh, I love that watermelon. Yeah, so we're getting a lot of fresh fruit on this and a little bit of tobacco. So my wine is a little cold, and I did that on purpose. I want this to warm up a little bit so I can really grab at that tobacco, because I don't think the fruit is going to dull down on this at all if I warm it up. So to warm up my wine, since the bottle is cold and the liquid is cold inside of it, I don't necessarily want to decant this, but I do want it to come up to temperature. One way you can do that is sip the wine slowly, which I don't necessarily want to do. Another way is to just lightly decant it, pour it into another container that is not so cold. So this is a room temperature carafe. I'm just going to very delicately pour it in. I don't want to splash this around. I don't want to change the wine in any way. I just want it to come up to temperature. So as I pour this in, the wine is going to come lightly up in temperature, just because the vessel is a little bit warmer than the bottle. So now that I've taken the bottle out of the equation, this is going to slowly start to warm up. It's going to take some time, but that's exactly what I want, because I want more of this wine to pop out as I drink it. So in 5, 10, 15 minutes, I'm hoping what I'm going to notice is that new notes are going to pop out, and it's going to be one at a time. So it won't be so overwhelming me trying to get in touch with this wine and the flavor compounds that are in there. They're going to come to me one by one. And as they come to you, I just want you to put them in the comments. Help me out with this wine, because as I'm talking, it's really, really difficult to tap fully into the wine. So I'm going to rely on you guys to do the same thing I'm doing and post these in the comments for me to read as I enjoy this wine. So now that I've poured this into a decanter, I'm already smelling that there's some spice notes coming out of this, and that happens as the wine warms up, which is wonderful. And Brian, before you ask, this wine has been aged for 17 months in 20% new Eastern European oak and 80% neutral oak barrels. What that means is with the neutral oak barrels, you're not getting any flavor from the barrel, you're just getting oxygen in contact. And with the 20% new Eastern European oak barrels, you are getting some vanilla, clove, spice character from the oak barrels in addition to that oxygen contact. If you have more questions about how wine is aged in different vessels, we can certainly talk about that. All right, let's sip and enjoy this wine together for just a moment before we get on to the topic today, which is single vineyard sites and how they're doing in Texas. We're going to call this episode A Day in the Life of a Vineyard Manager, and something I'm very, very excited to talk about. I'm working at William Chris Vineyards because I've never worked at a winery before, and William Chris Vineyards is the best. So what I hope to gain from working with William Chris is insight on what actually happens in a vineyard. The beautiful thing about working at William Chris is they're farming their own grapes. They're also working with single vineyard partners, and they're also they have grapes on site. So I'm getting a close-up look at all of this, and I'm very excited to share with you what I've learned. All right, let's drink a little bit. You're welcome, Brian. Oh, Lane says, I cheated and looked at Wine Folly at the tasting notes, which is totally fine. That's not cheating. Look at Wine Folly, look at these guides online, find out what Grenache is supposed to taste like, and just remember from last week's discussion, Grenache is a whole wheel. It has a whole wheel, and all we can do is get some of that wheel and make that shine in the glass. You can never have the entire wheel of Grenache in a single glass. That's what terroir is about, Terroir. It's the sense that place, climate, soil, all of that defines what of the Grenache wheel you will be able to get in the glass. You'll only ever be able to get some of that wheel. So even if you saw that Grenache is supposed to taste like this and this, it won't every time. So this should be different than what you read. And you should also have some similarities. Oh, a fun challenge for you is that Lost Straw Vineyards, they have also made a Grenache from Pradera Vineyards. So go onto the Lost Straw Sellers website, get theirs, and compare these two to each other. Find out what winemaking does to affect the flavor of the wine. You'll see a lot of differences there. Awesome comments. Awesome comments. I can't wait to go back through these and read them all. And talk to you next week about what I missed this week. All right. So let's talk single vineyard sites. So first, we read the label. Grenache. This is 100% Grenache. We haven't blended anything else in. Predaire Vineyards. This being on the label means that 95% of your grapes must come from this single vineyard site. And this is part of the new legislation that was passed in Texas called the Grape Compromise. We have sourced 100% of our grapes from Predaire Vineyards. But as long as 95% is in there, legally, we can have that vineyard name on here. And then Texas High Plains. And you know from the first episode that your grapes are coming from the Panhandle area. I'm going to share my screen with you and show you exactly where this vineyard is. So this vineyard is up here in Texas. So the little heart that you see is William Chris. And then up closer towards Amarillo, but not quite, that is where Pradera Vineyards is. And now you see a little bit closer in. Lubbock is right there. But more specifically, we're in Brownfield for Pradera Vineyards. So the owners of this vineyard are Michael and Barbara Paddock and Andy Timmons. They own 100 acres of Pradera Vineyards. Andy Timmons is who manages this. So when we're looking at single vineyard sites, you can have several different situations here. So the Paddock family and the Timmons family both grew up in Terry County. The Paddock family actually lives in Colorado now, and Andy Timmons is who manages the vineyard now. So we're going to look a lot at what Andy Timmons, what a day in the life of Andy Timmons is like. 100 acres is fairly large. So when you're looking at a single vineyard site, this could mean 1 acre all the way up to thousands of acres. And certainly with our single vineyard partners, we work with vineyards of all sizes. This is what 100 acres looks like up in the Texas High Plains. Technically, they own a total of 120 acres, but These are their vines. Something I want you to notice here is that all the vines are planted west to east. This is a vineyard choice. So when Andy Timmons and the Paddock family made the decision to plant these vineyards, they made the decision to plant west to east. And that's part of what vineyard management is thinking about the way the wind's blowing. If there's a freeze that blows through, what side of the vine is it going to hit first? So that's all the stuff that we're going to touch on today. All right. And taste this once more to see how it's warmed up. We're going to talk a little bit about single vineyard wines versus blends. Now, why would you choose to take Grenache from one single vineyard and put it into a wine? When we're blending, and keep in mind that the last 2 weeks, we had both blended wines. The Roussanne was blended with a little bit of Marsanne. And the first week we had Cinsault that was blended with a little bit of Carignan. The Carignan and the Marsanne were in such small amount that they were added in to blend, to balance. When you get a single vineyard expression of a single grape, you're getting an inherently unbalanced wine. And I don't want this to sound like a bad thing. Blending allows you to achieve balance. You have a really tart grape here, and you can blend it with something that's richer, and you achieve balance that way. With single vineyard sites, if you get tart grapes, you're going to get a tart wine. But that's what's so beautiful about this, is there is only rawness in this wine. You don't get anything hiding what La Pradera Grenache tastes like from 2019. It is a singular expression of 1 year, one grape from one single vineyard site. And here we get into this discussion of climates. You have a climate for an entire region. So the Texas High Plains is fairly cool. The average temperature is 61 degrees. When you go down to a single vineyard, you get a more specific climate. Maybe you have more rain at La Predaire Vineyards. Maybe you have more wind. Maybe the temperature's a little bit higher. And then you get even more specific and you look at just the Grenache blocks. That is a microclimate. So what we're going to see as we taste through our single vineyard expressions of wine is climate to a micro scale. We're looking at what a couple rows tastes like. The rows next to that will taste different. So when we blend grapes like this together, it's diluting some of that beautiful personality. And I just want you to think about, if we took Grenache from La Pradera and it tastes like watermelon and strawberry and tobacco after a little bit of aging, if we blended that with another Grenache from another vineyard that was more blueberry and it was more jam and it was more leather and herb, those would taste delicious together. But in a single vineyard expression, you are amping up that watermelon, that strawberry, that tartness, that floral characteristics. So we are getting amplified wine grapes here. You're not diluting anything. And that's what's so exciting. The other thing that single vineyard expressions mean is that you usually get a smaller amount. So Grenache from La Pradera Vineyards, we have a couple acres that we're getting these grapes from. However much fruit is produced that year is it. We made 585 cases of this wine, which means it is limited production of this amplified super cherry and strawberry fruit forward wine. After that, it's gone. It can't exist beyond that. When we're blending, we have the opportunity to make more of something. You get balance, you get some assurity that you're going to like this wine because it's rich, it's textured, and there's a lot of it. You can have consistency. Single vineyard wines are meant to be inconsistent, high quality wines. So if you are, for instance, a 4 or 6 bottle member, you may not be getting these small production wines. Since there's such limited production, you can usually only get these from the vineyard. You won't be able to get them in retail stores. And also we reserve these for, the 12 bottle members. We have less of those. So if you are wanting to get our most special small production single vineyard wines, make sure you're calling us often to see what those are, or join the 12 bottle club. Just bump up the bottles that you get only one of in your wine club shipments are usually the smallest production bottles. And those are the ones to set aside for a special occasion. The wines that you're getting 2 or 3 of in your in your wine shipments, those are your everyday awesome drinkers. You're going to be able to drink those really consistently, and we want that to be your everyday wine. Small production wines, special occasion. And that's when you give us a call, shoot me an email, and say, when is the special time to open this, if not just for the Summer Sippin series. All right, I'm going to see if y'all had more awesome questions or comments and drink a little more wine with y'all. Oh, we have some La Pradera fans. That's awesome. Jennifer, great question. Some grapes are blended for color and not taste. Yes, but keep in mind that you can't just add color to a wine from a grape without also getting the flavor of that grape. So for instance, Grenache and Syrah are often blended together. Syrah is blended in for color, but with that color comes pepper, it comes darker fruits, it comes sometimes a lot of leather. So you can't have one without the other. But yes, color often. Color is an interesting discussion. And I think a lot of us know that wine is often dyed. It's something that William Chris Vineyards does not do. This light color is so appealing to us because we know that it's true. There's nothing added to this to make the color deeper. But color is often added to wine to make it look more appealing, whatever that means, to make it look clearer, to make it look more vibrant. We want this color to change in the glass because when the color changes and you see that, it's a sign to you that your flavors are changing as well. And we think that's an absolutely beautiful thing. So this is warming up pretty fast. The fruit is a lot richer and jammier than it first started. And this is the great discussion about temperature. When the wine was cooler, the fruit tasted fresher. As it's warmed up a bit, the fruit tastes more ripe and a little jammy, which is why deciding the right temperature for the wine is so important. Thanks, Kelly. We love that the color does not change with William Chris as well. We want that natural expression. Awesome comments. Thanks, guys, for throwing your comments out there. All right, so let's talk a little bit more about single vineyards in Texas. So establishing a vineyard costs between $10,000 and $30,000. And this is information that I've gotten from the Texas Department of Agriculture. So this is the theorized number. It, of course, depends on the amount of acreage you have, but it doesn't include the cost of land, the cost of machines, the cost of labor, etc. It also doesn't include the cost of maintenance, year-to-year maintenance of the vines. Just starting out, this is an investment. So part of the reason it's such an investment is because when you plant grapevines, you have a lot of prep work to do first. You have to make sure your soil is tilled, that there's not a bunch of rocks in it that are going to prevent root systems. You have to make sure that there aren't other crops already planted that need to be pulled up, that have roots still in the soil, that won't allow your grapes to take root and hold on. You have to do tests on the soil to make sure there's not disease there. You have to, stick your finger to the wind and find out which way the wind is blowing. And then you have to assess any other potential threats. Are there lots of trees nearby that carry Pierce's disease? It's a major threat in Texas. Are you very far up north in the Texas high plains, closer towards Amarillo, where you get nasty freezes? All of these take probably a year, sometimes two, to assess. And when you have such a large vineyard like La Predaire Vineyards, it takes a lot of forethought, or at least knowing your area. So if it takes 3 years for the vines to fruit, it means that for the first 3 years at least, you're not going to have fruit to earn you back money. So the first at least 3 years are investment. After that, the ball gets rolling. So you have a couple of decisions to make before you actually plant a vineyard and go forth with it. The first is, do you have land? How much is it going to cost? Is this actually a sustainable project? And if you think it is, how are you going to continue to make sure it's sustainable? If you have nasty freezes that roll through, are you going to plant grapes that ripen later in the season and bud later in the season? Absolutely. So your second decision is in the grapes to plant. La Pradera is smart. They have an array. They planted Cabernet Sauvignon, Dolcetto, Carignan, Grenache, we know, Tannat, Petit Verdot, and several others as well. So they've diversified. That's one way that they've really protected their income. If you diversify and your Grenache isn't so great one year, at least you have all of these other vines that act differently, react to freeze differently, disease differently. So you have some assurity that you're going to be successful. And then you need to decide what your purpose is going to be. Do you just want to make money? If so, you know what to plant. Cabernet Sauvignon, Pinot Noir, Chardonnay, you know that's going to sell to wineries. It's what people love to drink. Or are you going to invest in grapes that make sense in Texas? Do you really, really want to be furthering the beautiful Texas terroir and showing off that Grenache and Tannat and Mourvedre and Cinsault are all grapes that love Texas, and that's what you want to devote to? That also comes with a little bit of risk. You have to find people who want to buy Mourvedre and Grenache and Cinsault and have customers that want to buy it as well. So before you even plant the vineyard, you have to have wineries that you know will buy from you. Luckily, there are many wineries in Texas that are devoting to 100% Texas loving grapes, and William Chris is one of those. Of course, we want Grenache. Of course, we want Mourvedre. Yes, we want Tannat. All of those grapes love Texas, and that's what we're going for. So La Pradera is in great hands with us. And to tell you a little bit about their story, I have to tell you about Andy Timmons. And I know I told you last week that we were going to talk a lot about Andy Timmons. We love his work. So Andy Timmons first met Chris Brundrett in 2007. Andy wanted to plant grapes in Texas. He thought he'd be really good at it. And he asked Chris Brundrett, hey, you've been a winemaker for a while in Texas. What do you think would grow well here? And Chris said, Mourvedre. And he gave a couple of other Texas grapes that he had identified by traveling to Spain, traveling to France, traveling to California, would be very successful in Texas. But not only that, change the name of Texas, change the game, and truly define us, not just in the next 10 years, but 100 years from now. These grapes will define Texas. Andy Timmons went and planted those grapes, came back 3 years later when Chris and Bill had created this beautiful project called William Chris Vineyards and said, your grapes are ready. And so our relationship with Andy Timmons started then. This is how you run a vineyard. You talk to the winemakers who know what they're talking about. And so thankfully, we have 3 estates that are managed by Andy Timmons. He owns Timmons Estate and manages it. He owns the La Predaire Vineyards with the Paddock family, and he manages that as well. And he also manages Lost Draw Vineyards. All 3 of these are up in the Texas High Plains, and they all have completely different personalities. But Andy Timmons has invested in wineries like William Chris Vineyards. He's so awesome that he plants what the wineries will buy and are willing to invest in. That's a really beautiful thing. Means that the control is not only with Andy Timmons. He is willing to have a partnership and a relationship with the winemakers in Texas. There's a conversation there. It's not just decisions made by him. It's not also just what's easiest to plant. There's a conversation of what the best quality will be there. So that is how those 3 vineyards started. La Pradera was planted in 2010. So this was 2 years after William Chris Vineyards has started. They sell their grapes, not just to William Chris Vineyards. La Pradera also sells to wineries like Lewis Cellars. They sell to Lost Draw Cellars. They sell to Pedernales and to Grape Creek as well, and many other vineyards. So there's constantly quality wineries looking for quality grapes. And it's a testament to the quality of La Pradera grapes because these high quality wineries are making delicious wine with their fruit. That also says there's consistency there, and we absolutely love that. Okay, I'm going to take a sip of wine before we go on and read some of the questions that you may have had. Asia, great question. Asia asked if Chardonnay does not grow well in Texas. Chardonnay likes cold climate, if that's enough said. It's very, very testy when it comes to frost. A freeze will demolish Chardonnay too early in the season. It's just very sensitive to it. And frost is a huge threat in Texas. And then on top of that, we have a ton of Texas heat, and it's just not what Chardonnay loves. So while we could grow Chardonnay in Texas, it's not necessarily a great investment on our part. It could be very expensive, but also we may not get the highest quality wine that way. And we do want high quality Chardonnays. We also want high quality grapes being made in Texas. So Chenin Blanc is similar, but much more successful here. Albarino, Roussanne, all of those grapes, they stand the freezes and they stand the heat a little bit better. So that's worth the investment, if that makes sense. Christopher, I'm going to try and answer your question. Can anyone offer for William Chris to plant on their land, or do vineyards prefer already established vineyard? That's a really good question. So this is diving right back into what we're going to talk about. So when you're first planting your vineyard, there are several decisions to make. Not only what grapes to plant, but do you want to make your own wine? Do you want to just sell your grapes and profit from it? Do you want to plant the grapes, crush the juice, and sell the juice? Do you want to sell some of your grapes or make some of your grapes into wine? There are a lot of decisions and a lot of different ways to make this. La Pradera, for instance, operates just as a vineyard. They don't make any wine from their fruit. They sell it all out. William Chris Vineyards operates a little bit different. We have a winery. We also have about 6-7 acres of grapevines. We don't necessarily plant the grapes at the other vineyards. We meet vineyard partners who are wanting to plant vineyards or already have established vineyards and have the discussion from there. What are you wanting to plant? How are you planning to manage your grapes? What type of soil do you have? Have you run tests to assess what the potential quality of the grapes could be? And there's a huge discussion beforehand. And I'll use Henry Croson as an example. Henry Croson owns a winery in Johnson City. He also used to work with William Chris Vineyards. What he told me in a tasting was that he works with people that he would want to share a beer with. So he's looking for responsible farmers growing quality fruit that are also just honest people who deserve attention, who deserve support. And that's who William Chris works with as well. So it's always a conversation. But we don't really, send people out to plant vineyards for us. There are a lot of successful vineyards already established and popping up around Texas. There's a huge web that connects us all. Chris and Bill are constantly running around all of Texas to assess the quality of fruit at established vineyards that we work with, vineyards that we've worked with before, and also looking for new vineyard partners. They are also farming 60% of the vineyards that we work with ourselves. So Chris and Bill are also vineyard managers, just like Andy Timmons. They're managing their own estate and other vineyards around Texas. They have their work cut out for them. It is a constant job, especially during harvest time. Bill and Chris are hard at work running around harvesting grapes in Texas right now, which is why you haven't seen them on videos quite as much. They are making great wine for you, starting with the work in the vineyard. I hope that answered your question, Christopher. We can always talk more about it. All right. When you're looking at what grapes to plant, there's even further discussion there. Not only can the grapes you're planting sell, but what is the risk with the grape? Is the grape early budding, like Tempranillo? That means that if you're in an area with a lot of freeze, it could be demolished. Is there a lot of disease in the soil? If so, you may have to use more pesticides. Is that something that you want? Do you want to be an organic vineyard? Do you want to be a sustainable vineyard? Do you want to make this vineyard as easy as possible so that you can be fairly hands-off? All of these you have to ask before you plant the vineyard. Not only that, you have to ask what clones of grapes you're going to use. So if you're walking through a vineyard and you see one vine that's standing taller and is greener and has just the best fruit, and you snip a little piece off of that vine, You can clone that vine to reproduce that set of qualities. Have you done your work walking through vineyards to find the best clones, the most respected clones around the US, in Texas? There's a lot of research that goes into this. And on top of that, are you going to graft your vines? And this is a discussion we'll have next series when we're drinking the Blanc de Bois. Grafting hybrid grapes. Is this something that you want to step into? This is a big part of what's happening in Texas. Now, grafting, if you snipped a piece off of that vine, if you grafted that onto an American rootstock, the American rootstock is an American creature. It has had proven success in Texas or just American soil. Keep in mind that the grapes that we're drinking originally came from Europe. So if you take a cutting of a European vine and graft it onto an American rootstock, you may have more success with that root in soil. And most of your grapes in Texas have been grafted onto American rootstock. So there is that process to go through as well. Where are you getting your rootstock from? You have to order it. You have to take care of it. You have to do the grafting yourself or hire someone to do this grafting for you. And that is a surety. It gives you a little layer of protection and a surety, knowing that your grapes may be more successful, more resistant to disease, more able to tolerate things like drought. All of these are things to consider when you're planting your vineyard. It's a lot, I know. We're going to take another sip of wine, and we're going to talk about water. Water in Texas soil. So we know water is an issue in Texas. How are you going to water your vines? You have to deal with irrigation before you plant anything. How much rainfall does the area that you're planting in get? Is there higher rainfall in the Texas high plains? What soil are you working with? Is it well-draining soil? Is it soil that holds on to water? La Pradera is lucky enough to sit on top of a soil type called Amarillo Sandy Loam. It has well-drained, deep soil that's sand combined with clay. Now, sand is great for holding in water. That is something that nourishes the vine. So while there is low rainfall up in the Texas high plains, the soil is helping the grapes hold on to the water a little bit longer. The soil also is mixed with limestone, and this is where we get into soil directly affecting the flavor of the wine. Has anyone noticed that this has a really bright acidity to it? And if you haven't noticed, I want you to taste the wine one more time and swish it around your mouth. Get it on the sides of your tongue. On either side of your tongue, it should water. That is acidity. There is limestone mixed with the clay in the subsoil of La Predaire Vineyards, and that helps boost acidity. This is a great thing for Texas because it's so hot, and on that raised bed of the Texas high plains, you're so much closer to the sun that the grapes are ripening, and as grapes ripen, acidity falls. You want balance there, and the limestone in the soil helps the grapes ripen without the acidity falling too low. So you can have, ultimately, a very balanced wine. We love this about La Pradera. This is why their wines have a freshness and a vibrancy. This is not something that you see all across the Texas high plains. So either the Paddock family and the Timmons family knew that this soil would affect the wine in this way, or they got lucky. Either way, we're super happy that La Pradera has such a singular, specific soil type because we get to reap the benefits from it. This is where you can get consistency of wine flavor from a single vineyard. So even when you taste the Merveille from La Pradera Vineyards or the Tannat from La Pradera Vineyards, you're going to see a consistency of fresh vibrancy and acidity, and that is entirely the soil. All right, Lane has a question. Does the time of day influence the type of wine you can drink? White, rosé, lighter, more tannic? And I think, Lane, what you're asking is a personal preference question. So do I normally drink sparkling wine in the morning and rosé at night and white wine, midday? No, I think it more depends on how much alcohol you want to be drinking. Sparkling wines tend to have lower alcohol, while red wines tend to have higher alcohol. That's one reason you would choose one over the other. And I would say temperature. If it's really hot outside, you're either going to chill down a red wine, or you're going to drink things that are meant to be chilled, like sparkling wine, rosé, or white wine. I would think time of day has less to do with it. But that's just me. If you disagree, let me know. All right. So we're going to speed through this next part. It's complicated. There's so much to discuss about single vineyard sites. When you're first planting the vineyard, you have to choose your orientation. Is it west to east? Is it north to south? If a freeze blows through, where is the freeze going to hit first? And this is something that I'll tie back to William Chris Vineyards. If you noticed after the freeze this year that you went on site and you saw that first row of Tannat vines on your left when you drive in looked kind of weaker than the ones behind it. The wind in the freeze blew straight into that first row, and the rows behind it were spared. Now imagine if the orientation of the vines had been the other way, if they had been rows like this. If the freezing wind had blown through there, it would have demolished most of the grapes. Maybe it would have spared the grapes at the very end, but you don't want the freezing wind blowing all the way through. And this is where really smart vineyard managers come in. This is Chris Brundrett, Bill Blackman. This is Andy Timmons. They're extremely intelligent about the risks in Texas, and freeze and frost is one of them. Another choice that you can make is hail netting. And if you've been to William Chris recently, you've noticed that we have hail netting on our grapes. We had a ton of freeze this year. We also had a ton of hail. That hail netting is very expensive, but it's worth it. This is where farmer responsibility comes in. When you cut corners, you can have big losses. Ultimately, we want healthy grapes because you reap the reward and you get a better flavor. You also, you're protecting your product. That hail netting also protects against things like rabbits. So here's where we get into the discussion of a day in the life of a vineyard manager. If you have 100 acres, what are you doing on the daily? You are touching every single grape that you can to make sure it has the best life possible. If you start on the eastern side of the vineyard and you're looking at all the grapes, by the time you make it through all of the grapevines to the west side, it's been days, if not weeks. When you go back to the other side, maybe there's a rabbit family that's popped up and it's eaten an entire row of grapes already. You are constantly finding disease on certain grapes, or you're finding that certain grapes aren't getting enough water versus these grapes on the other side. A rabbit family has popped up. Then you look at your phone and you realize that a freeze is going to pass through in the next couple of days, and you have to run through the entire vineyard with sometimes only 4 to 5 people to help. And you're constantly running through, tying vines down, making sure that the canopy, the greens, are not getting too long. There is so much assessment of these grapes. It is constant. And then when harvest runs around, you really have a small window of time in order to get the grapes up. So your wineries who are purchasing your grapes may come in and do tests. William Chris, they go out to the vineyards. They test the grapes to see when the sugar has built up and the acidity has fallen to a balanced level. That's the time to harvest the grapes. You cannot get sick at that time. You must harvest the grapes because 1 or 2 days will make or break it. You want to harvest the grapes when they're at their perfect balance. That's when you get a single vineyard, a single site wine that is imbalanced. Everything about these grapes has been magnified in this wine because there's nothing else to balance it out. There's no blending grape to fix anything about the wine. You have to make sure you harvest at the perfect time. You send your teams out, you either hand harvest or machine harvest, and you get things up as quickly as possible. These are when those 72-hour weeks pop up. You are working constantly because there is no sleep. Things happen so fast at this time. Now, just before harvest, there's also a little bit of risk with rain. If you get a lot of rain in your vineyard just before harvest, your grapes will swell and dilute. This is an extremely powerful, intense wine. These grapes are not diluted, which means that they were harvested at the perfect time, maybe just before some rain came through and would have destroyed the balance of these grapes. When I say things happen really, really fast in the vineyard, this is what I'm talking about. And then after this, there's no break. After harvest, you must prune the vines. You're setting up the vines for the next year. You're making sure that the buds are at the right place that you want. And these grapevines grow so fast and so wildly. You are constantly pruning and trimming to make sure that your grapes have a trunk that goes up like this, cordons that go out like this. You're constantly tying those to make sure that they don't go off in wonky directions. And then the leaves just pour over those. And the leaves from one grapevine will grow and grow and grow and reach all the way over to 10 vines over. So the process of trimming that back, especially for 100 acres, that is such a long process. And often pruning can go on from harvest, which is usually in July or August, all the way until April. This is a really long, long process. And by that time, the grapes have been going through dormancy. And even in dormancy, there's no rest. You're pruning, you're reassessing, you're fixing machinery, you're tilling the soil to make sure that it's going to remain healthy so that, wildflowers and grass don't grow and take nutrients out of the soil, and they don't alter anything. You're pulling up any vines that got attacked by disease or weren't successful. And then in the spring, you're prepping to replant those. And then you have a 3-year process of replanting a grapevine and slowly training it up onto your trellising system to make sure that 3 years later, the grapes are going to be healthy and to their full potential. It is such a long process. There's really no rest there. And I admire anyone who takes that on. That includes Chris, Bill, and Andy, and all of the grape growers in Texas. Texas has a lot to fight through. Freeze, hail, intense heat, those 105, maybe soon to be 120 degree days. Rabbits, pests, we have a lot of them. Deer, they're so sweet looking, but oh my gosh, they can do so much damage. All of that requires such responsible, hands-on farming. Luckily, Texas farmers have done it before. Predaire Vineyards was home to other agriculture before grapes. And that's what's so exciting about what's happening in Texas right now. Cotton, squash, watermelon, peanuts, all of that has been such a large business for agriculture in Texas for such a long time. What's interesting is now grapes can sometimes earn 6 or 7 times more than cotton or squash or peanuts, alfalfa. All of those crops growing in Texas just don't earn as much money anymore, which is why grapes in Texas is the new frontier. This is why it's time to invest in Texas wineries. Our vineyard workers, our managers are extremely smart. And there are wineries out there like William Chris, like Lost Straw Cellars, like Lewis Wines that are willing to work with 100% Texas grapes and give back to those families who are pulling up cotton fields and planting grapes in their place and taking a huge, huge risk. Also, an interesting fact, grapes drink less water than things like cotton and alfalfa. Grapes actually like to have very dry soil because they don't dilute with so much water. I find that very, very interesting. This is something that we could talk about for a very, very long time. The discussion goes on, and we've just looked at the general picture of running a single vineyard. I'm going to keep you updated with what's happening at William Chris, and one of those is that the grapes are going through veraison. Some grapes from Texas are even being harvested now. So soon we're going to see 2021 vintage popping into the bottle, which we're very, very excited about. All right. It's the end of our talk about single vineyard sites. If you have more questions about that, or if you ask questions here, I'm going to answer your questions next week. You're always welcome to shoot me an email, Kelsey, kr@williamchriswines.com, so that I can help answer your questions, because this was a big topic to tackle. And certainly we'll take a closer look at things like this in the future as we taste more single vineyard wines. One thing I want to point out is that this week we're drinking a single vineyard wine from the Texas High Plains. Next week, we're drinking a single vineyard wines from the Texas Hill Country. So there should be a big difference, not just because it's a different vineyard and a different grape and a different year, but because we're drinking from two different AVAs and they have major, major terroir differences. All right. So as we finish up, I want to ask you, what do you think is more specific than a single vineyard wine? How can you get more specific than that? Single block wines. So if you've ever gone onto our website and seen Merlot from Granite Hills Vineyard, 500 block, we have identified a single block within a vineyard that is doing better than the other vines. So maybe you've walked through your 1 acre of Merlot and you see that 4 rows are in this little dip, natural dip in the vineyard. Wind really funnels through that row, that 4 rows. That's going to taste different than the rest of the single vineyard site. You can choose to bottle that separately, just those 4 vines in the entire Merlot acre. Those 4 wines may be more exceptional, may have a different personality, may have more specificity, more intensity. You bottle that, you make wine from it, and you see what you get at the end. That's even more specific than a single site, and William Chris does that. From this, we're able to look at the entirety of Texas blended together to single AVAs that are blended together, like the Wanderer series or the Roussan, down to single vineyard sites, down to single blocks. And when we talk about microclimates, this is what I mean. It affects the flavor. It changes the grapes. This is where your cloning comes into play. If Bill Blackman planted some Merlot and found that 1 row was doing exceptionally well, he can clip some of those cuttings from that single row and domesticate a new clone of Merlot called the Blackman clone. And we can harness the specialty of that single row and replicate it. And that's where William Chris experimentation comes into play. That's what we're interested in, is looking at really, really small sites and showing off their personalities. Now, that's when you get into very, very limited production wines. So if you ever see a wine that has a specific block on the label, you know that that is exceptional fruit from a very, very, very small area. I love that discussion. I think it's such an interesting large to small snapshot, and you're able to taste that all with William Chris wines. All right, as we finish up, I've gone over once again. If you enjoyed this video, share it on your page. Invite more people to watch it. Also, the next Summer Sippin' series 4-episode wine pack is available now. So I shared with you the last series pack earlier. I'm going to share you the link to the next 4 wines that you can purchase. It is live on our website now at williamchriswines.com/shop. And I'm going to post it in the comments for you so that you can all go get yours now. We have some awesome wines ready for you, and we're coming up with the topics that we're going to talk about next week as well. If you enjoyed any of these topics, tell me about it. Tell me what you had the most interest in learning in the last 4 episodes. I certainly had a lot of fun researching these things, and I can't wait till we get till next week and really taste Texas Tempranillo, talk about what that single vineyard site excels at, what is special about it. We're really going to dig deep into our sensory memory and pull things out of the wine. All right. Tune in next week, Wednesday at 8. It's going to be the 2017 Tempranillo from Predaire Vineyards. You can go to the website and get the entire pack for the last 4 weeks, or just that wine if you just want the wine for next week. And then share this on your page so that more people can enjoy it. I can't wait to have another glass of wine after this. I hope that you're going to continue to enjoy this wine as it warms up. I'm going to see if y'all had any more questions that I can answer before we hop off. But thanks so much for joining today. This is such an interesting discussion that I had to do a lot of research on to fully comprehend and understand. Jennifer, how's the vintage for 2021 looking? Very rainy. It's very rainy. We had that heat wave a couple weeks ago. I mean, we've had a lot of rain. So this is definitely going to be a very different vintage than 2020, which was hot, dry days and cool nights. That is an exceptional vintage. The 2020 wines are drinking fantastically. 2021, we'll have to see. This is where innovation comes into play. Our winemakers are going to change what they did for the 2020 vintage and work a little bit differently for 2021 because the grapes are going to call for something different. I expect I don't want to say what I'm going to expect. I expect a very different flavor profile. But of course, just as high quality of grapes. If you're a responsible vineyard manager, it means that you are adjusting what you're doing to how the year is looking. You don't have a plan written down in stone that you follow to the T, because Texas just messes around with you. The weather, the freezes, the rain, the heat, the cold, the rabbits. I mean, you have a different challenge every single year. The great thing is we've done it all before, so I can't imagine 2021 threw us anything differently than something we've seen before. And I think back to vintages like 2014, where we had major freezes, lost most of the grapes in Texas, and still made some of the best wine that we've ever made. Texas vineyard managers, they know their things. We're hardy cowboys. Oh, hi, Tracy and Ed, my friends. Asia, I'm reading your question about years when you need to pivot from a single vineyard wine to a blend because some of the grapes aren't single vineyard caliber. That is an excellent question, Asia. And this is where blending comes into play. This is also part of the arguments against the legislation that just passed. If you have a bad year in Texas, if you have a tricky year where a lot of grapes have been damaged because of freeze, one of the solutions is to source grapes from outside of Texas to blend into your wine so you can still create a good product. If you have new legislation passed that says that you have to source all of your grapes from Texas, what do you do if there's a freeze or if something bad happens that year or your grapes aren't exceptional quality? You have responsible vineyard managers that know how to deal with it and still can produce exceptional quality grapes in years with challenges. And that's the risk of having Texas High Plains on a label and having to source 100% of your grapes from Texas, is that you can't cut corners. You can't blend in grapes from somewhere else and dilute your wines basically with better quality grapes from somewhere else. You have to still make exceptional quality grapes, even in the tough years. This is where you get into really specific things that I can't even speak to. I know that our vineyard managers are doing it because I can taste it in the wines. 2019 is not known for being the best the best vintage in Texas history, but this is a delicious wine. And that's entirely because Andy, Timmons, and the Paddock families have done what they've done. And Bill and Chris have worked closely with Andy Timmons to make sure that the wine is still exceptional in this challenging year. So I hope that answers your question. It is a huge challenge, and certainly in many parts of the world and for many wineries, blending is the answer to a lot of problems. We are not trying to hide behind a blend and just give you something, hidden. When you taste this wine, when you taste our blends, you should not get a hint of any off flavors. You should get a raw expression of exceptional grapes any year from us. It's a very, very good question. All right. I have many people talking to me through the chat, which I love, but it is time to hop off and have another glass of wine on your own. I want you to share this on your page with other people if you enjoyed it, and invite people to your house for the next one when we drink the 2017 Par Tempranillo. Again, we're talking about tasting next week. I'm super excited to see you all there. I missed you this last week, and I can't wait to see you next week again. Thanks a lot, guys. Bye.